Hey, Steve Mignani here for episode number 52 of the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast. And as you can see, I'm holding in my hand a Dodge Charger Daytona. This is one of those Avon aftershave dispenser things that they used to sell back in the 70s and 80s. And oh yeah, I can still smell it. It's still here. But this, of course, is our signal that we're into the Dodge section of my 2013 book, Steve Mignani's 1001 Muscle Car Facts. Of course, as you know, we've done 51 episodes before this. We did Chevy, Ford, Pontiac, Buick, Olds, and Plymouth. So if you want to see those or hear those, just go to Spotify, Google Play, etc., all of the standard podcast platforms or forums, and you can listen to those. They're all free. They're about a half an hour long. And what I do on this show, as you probably know by now, is I read about 15 or so facts from this book in order. And then between each fact, maybe a little commentary on why I chose that fact. And if you want to get your own copy of this book, it's from CarTech Books in wonderful North Branch, Minnesota. You can also find it on Amazon. And of course, most Barnes & Nobles will have this on their ever-shrinking automotive counter. So anyway, let's now get started here. Again, show 52. We're going to start with fact 741. And we are into the world of engine and driveline in the world of Dodge. So here we go. Fact 741. With high stall speed torque converter development in its infancy, Dodge transmission lab employee Roger Lindemood and his team created the Clutch-Flite automatic transmission in late 1964. Replacing the torque converter with a conventional pedal-activated dry clutch, drivers of TorqueFlite equipped cars could begin drag races at the same engine speed as stick shift equipped cars. But after exploding off the line at more than 4,000 RPM, upshifts were made as simply as pushing the buttons marked second and drive when the tach needle hit the appropriate RPM. The 383 cubic inch D-stroked race Hemi in Fred Cutler's Roadrunner 1965 Dodge Coronet A990 was an early Clutch-Flite recipient. It raced in the NHRA B factory experimental class, where such innovations were legal. Once Chrysler got the Clutch-Flite ball rolling, aftermarket companies such as B&M, C&O, and Art Car ran with the idea. Now, the Clutch-Flite was a thing, and in fact, it even spawned things like Clutch Turbos and Clutch C6s, which were Chevy Turbo 400 transmissions and Ford C6s with the bell housing cut off, and then with an actual steel bell housing with a clutch inside added on. And so the Clutch-Flite was the pioneer, and the whole thing was basically getting away from the problem of low stall speeds. And our audio man, Donovan, is here, and everything's looking good okay, Donovan?
Everything's going pretty good.
Right on, good stuff. Just want to be sure you can hear and see what we're doing here. And of course, you might wonder, why watch Steve read a book on YouTube for a half an hour? Well, the thing of it is, the show, we still have another, 200 odd facts to go in this book. And we will be bringing in guests here in the studio. So as we go forward, there'll be somebody sitting with me, perhaps people from High Octane Classics, which I have to remind you, by the way, this show is presented by High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. Dan Marinelli and the people at High Octane Classics are top notch. They have a wide assortment of Mopars, GM, Ferraris. Yeah, if you want a Ferrari, they have some of those too. So again, High Octane Classics, our sponsor. We thank them very much for helping to make the show possible. Okay, we'll continue. Let's move on to more engine and driveline facts. 426 Hemi stuff, okay. 742, fact 742. This reads, the 1962 426 Hemi was the first Chrysler production engine to employ cross-bolted main bearing caps. While the stronger caps better contained the rotating assembly, brute strength wasn't the primary goal. Rather, during extended operation at high RPM, as encountered during the Daytona 500, cap deflection compromises the oil wedge formed between the crank journal and the bearing face, resulting in cumulative bearing wear. Under less strenuous conditions like drag racing, the effect is momentary and of little consequence. The switch to cross-bolted number 2, 3, and 4 main caps was made primarily to stabilize the caps for improved bearing life for endurance racing. Two things here. I just mentioned, I started this, it says here, this book contains some typographical errors, and here's one I had never seen before. This is fact 742. I see here the 1962 426 Hemi. We all know the 426 Hemi debuted in 1964. So I'm going to make a note here that I made an error in this thing. I must have been thinking the Max Wedge, which came out in 62, but here it is, fact 742. The 62 426 Hemi changed that to 64. So if we do another print run of these puppies, there will be a correction to that. But anyway, with that said, yes, the Max Wedge of 62, 3, and 4 had 2-bolt mains. The race Hemi did not, because again, for endurance racing, where the crank's going to be spinning at high RPMs for a long time, and the caps might bounce a little bit, and yeah, they move at $7,000. The oil wedge was compromised, and over time, it would create a wiped bearing, but not so much on a drag strip. So anyway, now we know that. Okay, more NASCAR stuff with fact 743. When NASCAR imposed severe handicaps on the Hemi in 1971, many Dodge and Plymouth teams reverted to 426 Max Wedge engines that were similar to what they ran in 1963. The major difference was the number of those latter-day wedges built on 426 Hemi blocks. After reworking the oil drain passages, the beefy Hemi block readily accepts wedge heads while delivering the bearing-saving benefits of cross-bolted main caps. Apparently, Bill France's Hawks were okay with the block juggling. These 426 cube wedge Hemi hybrids were common during the 1972 through 74 NASCAR race era. Yeah, that's a fact. The 426 Hemi and the 426 wedge are very similar in many ways, but if you look at the end of the block, you'll see the Hemi actually has a squared corner and an external kind of looks like a vein almost coming down the side of the block cast into it. That's an oil drain on the front and the back of both sides. The wedges are rounded in that spot. But with that said, you can put wedge heads onto a Hemi block and enjoy the benefits of that massive, cross-bolted main lower end. You're just going to plug off those oil drains. So if you see a picture of, say, Richard Petty's 1972 number 43 Roadrunner or his 73 or thereabouts Charger with the STP, those things had Hemi blocks with Max Wedge heads. Keep in mind, of course, that the Hemi was severely handicapped after 1971 with restrictor plates, smaller displacement, that kind of stuff. So that's why a lot of the racers went to the wedge heads, so they weren't as badly handicapped. And they still ran, but again, they had those Hemi blocks under the wedge heads. It's a fact. Okay, moving on. Max Wedge facts with 744, number 744. To reduce the load on the 426, to reduce the load on the 1964 Stage 3 426 Max Wedge's Tri-Y exhaust manifold mounting flanges, Chrysler used a pair of steel supports. Made of 3/4 inch diameter tubing with pinched ends, the supports, one per side, bolt to specifically cast and tapped fastener holes in the cross-ram intake manifold or the NASCAR single 4-barrel manifold, as the case may be. It was a handy way to prevent heat and vibration-related metal fatigue from harming the weighty cast iron castings hanging off each cylinder head. At roughly 40 pounds apiece, the Tri-Y exhaust manifolds blatantly contradicted Chrysler's use of exotic aluminum fenders, hoods, and bumpers. Their main intent was intended for NASCAR racing, not the drag strip, where nose weight is more closely scrutinized. Yeah, if you ever take a picture or take a look at old magazines with like the Cotton Owens number 6 64 Dodge before they went to the Hemi, you'll see the 4-barrel 426 wedge has these crazy manifolds, not a 62 through 63 type Max Wedge piece, but bigger. They have like sort of cast-in Y shapes on them. Those are the things I'm talking about with the Tri-Ys. I've seen 2 of these in my life, both times at Chrysler's at Carlisle, but those manifolds are heavy as heck. And indeed, because they're so heavy, they had tubular supports running from the intake manifold to them to keep them from falling off the engine or or weighting their flanges and maybe causing cracks. And by the way, if you build 1/25th scale model cars, Johan in 1964 and 5 released a couple of 64 Dodge models which have little 1/25th scale replicas of those Tri-Y manifolds. They're pretty cool, they're very rare, and they're actually very accurate. So another case where model cars followed reality in a very interesting way. Okay, let's move on to more manifold tech with fact 745. The upswept cast iron exhaust manifolds used on 413 and 426 Max wedges aren't as heavy as they look. I've weighed them, and the passenger side comes in at 27.5 pounds. The driver's side checks in at an even 32 pounds. So it's kind of interesting. They look big and heavy. Now, I'm not talking about the Tri-Ys of late 64. But rather 62, 3, and most of 64, those sort of upswept manifolds, which are being reproduced, by the way. Mancini Racing will sell you a set of those things for, I think, about $800. In other words, far less than you'll pay for originals, which are often cracked. But with that said, I've weighed them, and again, at just about 30 pounds on average a piece. They're not as bad as they look, and they certainly do flow better than the log-style manifolds seen on like Imperial 413s, and certainly they're better than the 440 Magnum style, which is sort of a compromise. It's a lower upswept manifold, but the best stuff is Max Wedge stuff. The only trouble is it doesn't fit all applications. They're kind of big and they stick out. But it is a fact, they're not as heavy as they look. Okay, let's move on to fact 746. 1985 was a good year for the Shelby Charger. The 2.2-liter inline-4 gained a Garrett Air Research T3 turbocharger, and output leapt from 107 to 146 horsepower. Sounds like a big deal. It kind of was. The sub-2,500-pound curb weight was minimally impacted by the extra hardware, but the power-to-weight ratio jumped from 22.7 to 1 pounds per horsepower to 17.1 pounds per horsepower with the turbo. Better still, once Shelby's crew added an intercooler for the 1987 GLHS variant, of which 1,000 were built, output jumped to 175 horsepower from 146, and the power-to-weight ratio tumbled to 14.2 pounds per horsepower. For comparison, a typical 1966 Charger with a 383 weighs 3,900 pounds and delivers a 12 pounds to 1 horsepower power-to-weight ratio, which is only a couple pounds heavier than the Charger 2.2. Line them up, and it's safe to say the Peppy Shelby would lead to the race despite its wrong-wheel drive. Now you'll notice here I'm jumping from Max Wedge and NASCAR history to the 1980s with the turbo cars. Well, they all fit into the picture, and in my book, literally and otherwise, the front-wheel drive 80s stuff, while not as exciting as the earlier stuff, well, it kept the candle lit. Without those 80s turbo cars and even the non-turbo K cars, as boring as they were, we would not have Chrysler today, and we wouldn't have the Demon, the Hellcat, all that good stuff. So, these are bricks in the foundation that are important. So I included them in my book. And why not? Okay, let's go with fact number 747. A little bit of Hot Rod Magazine history. The May 1962 issue of Hot Rod Magazine has an excellent 13-page feature story by Ray Brock on how Chrysler developed the Max Wedge engine. It is full of factory photos, including a pre-production prototype cross-ram intake manifold fitted with a removable plenum. The goal was to test the effect of carburetor placement. A similar handmade manifold, perhaps the same one, appeared in the Roger Huntington photo collection mounted atop a 413 test engine in a 1962 Plymouth mule car. Clearly, there was lots of testing conducted before the ideal cross-ram intake manifold configuration was found. Yeah, it's true. If you look at that magazine, again, May 1962, Ray Brock got really good insider clearance to the Chrysler Tech Lab and all that stuff. And before the big aluminum cast manifold arrived, these hand-built steel things with removable lids were made. And one of the things that they definitely played with was where to put that carburetor on top of the plenum, how far away, and in relation to the front, the back, the side to side. So it's pretty cool. You got to wonder where that stuff is now. Probably scrapped. Most car makers destroy that stuff because it's not needed, takes up space, and they're always thinking about next year, not last year. Kind of too bad, but it's a fact. Want to thank our sponsors at High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership, located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. Again, that's 508-859-4515. Get back to the show here. This is fact number 748. Contrary to popular belief, the J-Code 346-pack engines built for the 1970 Challenger Trans Am and AAR CUDA were not factory assembled with 4-bolt main bearing caps. Instead, the blocks were cast with extra oil pan rail material and thicker bulkheads, but it was up to the end user to drill and tap the outboard fastener holes and obtain the requisite 4-bolt caps from the dealership parts department. These special blocks weigh 20 pounds more than standard 340 engine block castings and are easily identified by a TA340 casting number on the driver's side of the block. Yeah, it's a fact that the Challenger TA and AAR CUDA with their 346-pack engines were, Dodge and Plymouth's bids to topple the Camaro Z28 and the Mustang Boss 302 in SCCA racing. But again, it was up to the racers to bring those raw materials to their fullest perfection for race use. And again, the Boss 302 and the Chevy Z28 DZ302, they came from the factory with 4-bolt mains, but the 340 Mopar 6-pack did not. But again, the block was cast in such a way that you could quickly convert it to 4-bolt mains, but they weren't born that way. Not a big deal, just a small detail. Okay, moving on to fact 749. The 340 TA 4-bolt main cap conversion was simple compared to other aspects of race engine preparation. Remember, the SCCA Trans Am series imposed a strict 5-liter, which is 305 cubic inches, displacement limit. The stock 340 crank's 3.31-inch stroke was too great and had to be replaced by an aftermarket, usually Keith Black, stroker crank with the smaller 2.96-inch stroke. So from 3.31 to 2.96 to bring it down to 305 cubes. With the unaltered 4.040-inch bore, the combination delivered the legal 305 cubic inches and 8,000 RPM capability. That said, very few of the 5,123 346-pack engine customers, of which 2,399 went into Challenger TAs and 2,724 went into AAR CUDAs, very few of these racers were serious SCCA competitors. The vast majority of the 346-pack E-bodies served as street and strip machines where the 2-bolt main caps and 340 cubic inch displacement remained unaltered for the life of the vehicle. It is true that we see a lot of pictures of Dan Gurney and all those guys with their race prep Challengers and Barracudas running against the Mustangs and Z28s and 70, 71. And those things had 305 cubic inch engines with single 4-barrel carburetors, but the street versions had a 340 with 6-pack stuff. And again, it was up to the racer to take the 346-pack and make it legal for SCCA racing. It's one of those rare occasions where Chrysler actually over-delivered for the street. Okay, fact 750. Here we go. This is more AAR CUDA stuff, or Challenger TA, I should say. They're the same thing in a lot of ways, but this is the Dodge chapter, so we're talking Dodge here. Okay, special heads with casting number 3418915 were included with every Challenger TA and AAR CUDA, but again, it was up to the end user to fully reap the performance benefit. Cast with extra iron around the ports, customers had plenty of opportunity to grind away material for significant flow improvements without breaking through the metal into water. Another key feature was a significant outboard relocation of the intake pushrods and drilled pushrod holes. This eliminated much of the intruding pushrod hump that plagues all LA intake ports. And again, like the engine blocks, the cylinder heads on those TA engines were full of potential, but it was up to you to get it. Cylinder head porting, especially on iron heads, is ugly work. I've done it before, and those metal shavings feel like like prickles in your socks at the end of the day, and they stick into your skin. I'd much rather port aluminum. But again, aluminum was not legal in the SCCA in 1970, so these iron heads were as good as things got. But it's kind of nice today to find a set of TA heads that haven't been ported. It's a 50-50 scene. I've seen both at the swap meet. But the unported ones are actually worth more. Okay, more 346-pack data with fact 751. Okay, the 346-pack stands as the only Chrysler engine produced with adjustable rocker arms and a hydraulic camshaft. These features rarely converge, but in the case of the 70 346-pack, the relocated intake push rods prevented the use of existing 340 stamped steel rocker arms because the balls and cups were no longer aligned. While it probably would have been cheaper to whip up some specific stamped steel offset rocker arms to solve the problem, Chrysler invested in high-strength cast steel rocker arms incorporating the proper offset to do the job. Doing it this way spared racers the expense of trying to find suitable aftermarket rocker arms when swapping a solid racing cam in place of the stock hydraulic unit. Yeah, it's interesting. If you take a 346-pack car, driver's side, remove the oil filler, you can look inside and see the rocker arms. If the car's correct, you'll see a forged iron rocker arm with an adjuster nut on the end of it. If it's not correct, you'll see the cheap stamped steel rocker arms found on 318s and other 340s with 4-barrel carburetors. So again, the adjustable rocker arms were there because they accommodated the offset of the rocker arms, and the push rods, I should say, which were moved outboard a little bit due to the thicker cylinder head port external configuration. If you own one of these engines, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, let's go back in time to 1968 with fact 752. Though based on the 1968 344 barrel, the 1970 346-pack contained enough unique parts, like the block, heads, push rods, rocker, arms, triple Hawley induction system, to warrant its own engineering code, which was A340. The 1968 single carbureted 340 was designated the A105. For reference, the 1964 273 small block, Chrysler's response to the Chevy 283 and Ford 289, was identified as the A828 program. And finally, the high-performance 273 4-barrel was coded the A861 engine in 1965. Yeah, these A-series numbers are something that Chrysler utilized mostly internally, but enthusiasts like to geek out and feel a bit of inside mojo by saying, I got an A990, which is, of course, be the 1965 race Hemi cars, or the A12 1969 6-pack liftoff hood stuff. So again, the 346-pack was the A340, 344 barrel was the A105, and et cetera, et cetera. Now you know. All right, let's go to the 426 Hemi, or actually let's go to some Hemi history, but not 426, with fact 753. Hemi historians must remember there were 3 distinct Hemi engine families produced in the 1950s: Dodge, DeSoto, and Chrysler. Each type is highly specific and has virtually no parts interchange. The Dodge engine was the smallest, inside and out, and debuted with 241 cubes in 1953. By 1957, Dodge displacement had grown to 325 inches, but despite extra deck height in 1956, from 9.287 inches to 10.38 inches, Dodge engineers felt the basic architecture was maxed out at 325 cubes while maintaining 100,000-mile reliability. In its brief 5-year lifespan between 1953 and 1957, Dodge produced Hemis in these sizes: 241 cubes, 269 cubes, 315 cubes, and 325 cubic inches. The most potent of which was the dual quad 310 horsepower, 350 foot-pound Super D500 of 1957. After 1957, all Dodge V8s employed less costly polyspherical or wedge combustion chambers until the limited return of the 426 Hemi in 1964. Yeah, it's interesting that, Chrysler, for whatever reasons, in the 50s, tooled up 3 very distinct Hemi engine families. People who own DeSoto Hemis are kind of left out because the DeSoto Hemi was the least hoppable. I mean, they had as much potential, but the aftermarket did not rise to the challenge because, frankly, Dodge and Chrysler Hemis were the ones that people went after. The DeSoto stuff was okay, but again, it was mid-size. The valve covers on a Dodge Hemi are small. The valve covers on a DeSoto are mid-size. The valve covers on a Chrysler are huge, and so is everything else about those engines. Nothing interchanges. Kind of crazy, but true. Okay, here's the last fact for this episode, which is episode 52. This is fact 754. When Dodge conjured the D500 Coronet NASCAR race package of 1957, it raided the Chrysler parts bin and swiped a bunch of 1956 Chrysler 300B specification Hemi engines. A full 5 inches wider than the Dodge-sourced 325 cube baby Hemi used in the same year 57 D500, which was a less potent yet still muscular offering, the Chrysler-sourced 354 firepower was a sight to behold. So as not to blur product identity boundaries and perhaps to conceal the Chryslers in a Dodge switch from the overly inquisitive racetrack officials, these special Hemi engines were fitted with non-denominational rocker covers which didn't have the usual Chrysler Firepower stamp logos, nor did they sport Dodge Red Ram pressings. These no-name 354 Hemi rocker covers were only fitted to Dodge D501 engines and are highly sought after today. Yeah, it's true. It's kind of weird. A Chrysler 354 in a Dodge D500-1. Yeah, it happened. D501-1, that is. The punchline there is that, like all high-performance Gen 1 Hemis, which used a mechanical rocker arm, there are stamped humps in these valve covers between the spark plug holes. And what those humps do is they provide clearance for the adjuster nut on the end of the rocker arm. So if you ever find a set of 354 Chrysler valve covers with no name, but with the stamped humps, you found yourself a set of very rare goodies from the D501 Hemi of 1957. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Steve Maggs Muscle Car Show podcast. This, of course, is show number 52. And we want to thank our sponsors, as always, the people at High Octane Classics, the Northeast's largest muscle car and supercar dealership, located at 143 Washington Street in Auburn, Massachusetts. Dan Marinelli and the staff there at High Octane Classics buys and sells and services muscle cars and exotics. Give them a call at 508-859-4515. Until next time, hasta mañana.